This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 524, entitled Presenting the Masculist Case to an Open-Minded but Ignorant Feminist. Description. This flyer presents a dialogue between a well-informed masculist and an open-minded but monoconscious feminist. The feminist actually listens to the masculist, which is rather unusual in the experience of masculists, since most monoconscious feminists freak out when they hear the masculist case for the first time, having been brainwashed over the past 6 decades that gender oppression is a one-way street. The flyer itself. Presenting the masculist case to an open-minded but ignorant feminist, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Prof. Hugo de Garis at yahoo.com, and website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. By ignorant, I mean that she is monoconscious, that is, has only had her feminist consciousness raised and knows nothing about masculism, or about how much worse that women oppress men, given their many gender crimes against men that last decades. But at least she is open-minded and not a real MFB, that's monoconscious feminazi bigot, who masculists despise and avoid like the plague. It's very much in masculists' self-interest to convert millions, later billions, of women to bi-consciousness, that is, by educating them into masculist ideas, so that millions of women vote with men for the men-fairing of the gender laws, which is also in women's self-interest, since without the gender laws men fared, millions of young men will continue to boycott marriage and paternity, given the hateful toxicity of the divorce courts for men, which have been taken over by the fluffy feminists and made so toxic for men that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men. So millions of men just wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, preferring to go their own way, living the MGTOW lifestyle of rejecting marriage and paternity and spending their money on themselves, rather than risking a 1 in 4 chance of being financially crucified in a hated, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court, if he is stupid enough and ignorant enough, in brackets, of masculist and MGTOW ideas, close brackets, to marry and have kids, then losing his kids, his house, half his wealth, half his stuff, forced to pay child support to kids he will barely see, and far worse, if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, thus manslaving him for decades, a war issue for the masculists. Many feminists, being monoconscious, are angry at men, since this is what feminism teaches them, that is, how men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc. What feminism does not teach women is masculism. Nearly all feminists today are monoconscious, knowing nothing about masculist ideas, so do not have their feminist anger at men cancelled by a masculist anger at women. To most women, gender oppression is strictly a one-way street, since the only gender oppression that they have ever heard of is feminist. So by default, they tend to be rather feminazi bitchy towards men. The higher the intellectual level of women, that is especially those with PhDs, tend to be very feminazi bitchy, because a lot of these highly qualified women have read literally hundreds of feminist books, so are very well informed about how men oppress women, so tend to be very feminazi bitchy towards men, especially towards masculists who lash out at the gender crimes committed by women against men. These very feminazi bitchy women see this masculinist anger as just more male misogyny, so they really stiffen their backs, dig their heels in and attack the masculists, utterly missing the point that the masculists have very good reason to be angry and hateful at women for the many ways that women oppress men, and often for decades of a man's life. But not all monoconscious feminists are feminazi bitchy. Some of them try to keep an open mind, so are prepared to listen to the masculists. So this flyer gives advice on how a masculist can approach such a woman, presenting to her the masculist case, so that she begins to understand the source of masculist anger and hatred at the horrible things that women do to men, often over a period of decades, so of very serious gender crimes against men that men are now really starting to fight against in terms of a whole gender political and social movement called Masculism, the male equivalent of feminism, which is out to liberate billions of men who are still man-slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives, who are thus truly not liberated. So, imagine a conversation between an open-minded, non-feminazi bitchy type feminist and a well-informed masculist who's trying to persuade her that men have very strong reasons to be angry and hateful at women for women's gender crimes against men. Let's listen in to this dialogue. F.
I heard you say you are a masculist. I guess that means you're a men's libber. But what does that entail exactly?
M. Is this a rhetorical question, or do you genuinely want to know? F.
I've heard a bit about fathers complaining bitterly about being cut off from their kids after a divorce, but not much else. So what else do you masculists have to say?
M. Okay, fair enough. How about we take a seat, I'll buy you a drink, and you listen to the 5-minute masculist spiel, after which you will know a ton more about the masculist case. F.
Okay, fire away.
M. Masculists claim that women now have a very powerful moral obligation to FIP up, in brackets, FIP, F-I-P, equals financially independent person, close brackets, since women have, thanks to men, a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century. Even for those women who take some years off work when the kids are very small. The masculists are telling women, quote, now that you women can work, you must work. Anything else is seen by the masculists as man's slavery. To have your masculist consciousness raised means, essentially, that you see fluffydom as manslavery. In brackets, a fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a masculist label for a traditional woman who expects to be able to live off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him for decades, a huge gender crime in the eyes of the masculists and something to be wiped out, close brackets. F.
I see the logic of what you're saying, but can imagine this masculist message will be very threatening to millions of women who expect men to work for them when their kids are small.
M. Masculists estimate that about 80% of young women choose to become fluffy crappers at high school, then are forced to study more fluffy crap at college, ending up with a fluffy crap diploma that doesn't allow them to earn good money. In their 30s, with their biological clocks ticking hard, they will wake up that they can't afford to buy their own middle-class house to raise their kids in. So start looking around for some guy to pay for that house for her and for her kids. To a masculist, such a fluffy is seen to be a manslaver. Masculists see manslavery as 1,000 times larger problem than was Negro slavery in the 1800s in the US, because there were several million Negro slaves at the time, and there are several billion man slaves in the world today. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being man slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives. That was the traditional role of the man in a nuclear family, when the mother had a dozen kids, no household gadgets, no pill, no higher education, and worked from dawn till dusk on the farm. But men then liberated women with the pill, household gadgets, etc. So now masculists stand up, point the finger at women and tell them, if you don't fit up, you'll be forced to rot on the shelf. Since when nearly all men have had their masculist consciousnesses raised, they will not tolerate having a relationship with a manslaving, fluffy parasite. So fip up or be manless. F.
Eek, that's heavy. I'm starting to feel a bit threatened myself, since I've always expected that when the time comes for me to have kids, there'll be some guy helping me pay for all that. That is, the house and the kids. M. These fluffy mothers then drag their divorcing husbands through the fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts and have them financially crucified. These divorcing husbands will lose custody of their kids with 90% probability, which is causing 2/3 of young men in many countries now to reject paternity, since they are absolutely not prepared to face a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids, so prefer not to have any at all, so don't bother marrying either. Millions of men now prefer to live the LAT, that's L-A-T, living apart together lifestyle with a woman to get the regular sex and companionship a man wants from a woman, but none of the traditional costs to him that the traditional man pays in being a manslave to a woman. This is the end of part 1.